Yeah.
Thanks, Kristen. Okay, so at the plenary this morning, one of the announcements that was made, I think, is particularly pertinent to this track of material, and that is that those of us who've been coaching for a long time, I think, often bemoan the fact that, like, oh, we'd like to use this case or that case from the past in our classes, or, we want to use it as a teaching tool in some way, but we don't have access to those cases anymore. There were only a few listed on the API page at any given time. Well, Michael and Kristen have put together a database. And so let me just show you that real quickly. Um, Hold on. Uh, So check this out, everybody. If you go to the API page and you go to cases, rules, and guidelines, and you scroll down, there's a bunch of cool new stuff where the rules are a little bit easier to access and they look really nice. And then, but down here, this is the great thing. All of the cases since 2001 are there. And then also, um, um, Michael Jordan and Kristen are working together to create this searchable database of cases that pop up by keyword. So if you're looking from, oh, I remember in 2014 there was this case I'd love to use in my class. Well, it's going to be available. So that's so exciting. Be just checking the page regularly. Michael says he's going to try to get the searchable database up after he gets back from his trip, which is just in a few days. So, okay, welcome all.
Awesome.
We'll hand it over to Jonathan.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Rachel. Um, so I guess like I'm going to talk a little bit about a class that I did and how I used the ethics bowl in that class. And I've used the ethics bowl in a few like an ethics bowl type competition in a few different classes. But last semester was a sort of new thing and it was pretty successful. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. I am going to share at one point here. So yeah, I'm going to type in like a link to a Google Doc that I'm going to use to talk through things. So if people want to click on that document to look at that, I'll also share on the screen kind of along. Um, so let me see if I can do that. Okay, it looks like it's working. Um, so just for a bit of background, like I got into the ethics bowl. I teach at Ohio Northern University, where Pat Crosker used to teach, and Pat was so amazing, and I loved working with him. And he was like the director of the ethics bowl stuff for a while. So um, and he kind of introduced me to it, and he would, we had a team and got started, and I thought like, hey, this would be a great thing to use in the class, but it takes a long time to do like like a round of the ethics bowl. So, you're kind of always modifying or trying to figure out how do I like make this work in a particular context. And um, what happened, sort of the context for the class I'm going to describe to you is that the director of our honors program had this idea. He wanted, like, he saw the value of the ethics bowl. He was a religion professor, like that was just down the hall from us, and it was like, hey, I'd really like, it'd be great to get more honor students doing this ethics bowl type stuff. They revised the honors curriculum a little bit, and so they ended up creating like an honors class that all honor students had to take, which was called Practical Ethics. And you'll see the syllabus the full syllabus at that link. But he thought it would be cool to get the honor students like engaged in this kind of activity and taking this particular ethics class. And so my colleague and I were like, yeah, sure, we'd love to do that. We ended up having like 4 different sections of this honors ethics class. And so I had to, and my colleague had to. Um, and that's sort of the context in which this particular class was created. Now you might think, well, that's an honors class, and will that really work for the general education um, population, just the ordinary students? And I think that this same idea would work in theory. So there are some, unique features of the of this version, but I think the sort of structure is one that could be replicated in a variety of different classes. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of describe the structure of this class, and then I can say a little bit about some of the assignments and how they match up. But I'm not planning to talk for all that long. Rachel agreed to assist me in case the internet cuts out or is weird where I'm at. And so I would encourage her to jump in where she wants to. And if people have questions like along the way, I would really encourage you to raise your hand and we can sort of address the questions as they come up. And well, I'm sure we'll have time at the end as well. Um, I know there are a lot of others out there too who have experience using this in the classroom, and I'd be curious to hear how they have used it differently than I have. Okay, so um, kind of what we thought we would do in this class is it's not ethics class, which is what Rachel do it in a significant way. So we start out the class kind of as you might start any other introduction to ethics. I talk a little bit about, what ethics is. We talk about why we should be moral, and then we introduce some ethical theories. So you'll see that in like sort of week two, these questions about why should I be moral? What's the point of it all? I like to get them thinking a little bit about that, like what's morality about, or why should we care about what's ethical? Then in weeks 3 and 4, we talk about various ethical theories. Uh, I've here you see like I'm talking about 5 different ones. We're using sort of Schaefer-Landau's textbook in this class across all the sections, but obviously you can use whatever textbook you might like to do this. I think you could introduce, I mean, different people like to do this differently. I like to introduce the theories. I think they're helpful in sort of at least highlighting the central considerations or the things that people should be paying attention to when they're looking at sort of an ethical issue. We should think about the consequences. We should think about autonomy and respect. We should think about the virtues, and we should think about responsibilities and care, that sort of thing. So that's through weeks 4. Um, then because this is, we talk a little about constructing arguments. This is something I like to do, do a little bit of logic, give them a little bit about like, what does it mean to come up with an example or a counterexample and help them sort of understand how philosophers use those tools. And then we have a little bit, we have like a week on professional ethics. And that's because the class that this class is sort of replacing for a lot of students. They have like there's a university has the engineering programs and the pharmacy programs have a professional ethics requirement. So we thought like we want to sort of throw those programs a bone and still talk about some professional ethics and help the students see the unique responsibilities that professionals have. But if you don't have that, if you're just teaching an applied ethics class, maybe you don't want to talk about professional ethics at all. You can kind of cut out that week and do without that. Okay, we have an exam at week 7, and then like that is like a pausing point. And we've sort of taught the students the kind of background skills, theories, some of the knowledge they need. And then we sort of move into this part of the class where they're going to be in the ethics bowl competition. We've divided that last part of the class into sort of 2 chunks. So you'll see like weeks 8 through 11 are the first chunk. And we think about that as like personal ethics or like individual ethics, where we're sort of thinking about our individual moral responsibilities and the ethics of particular actions that we would take. Then there's the second half that's broken into sort of like weeks 12 through 15, and those are more social or political issues. You can obviously break this up kind of however you want, but I think the one nice thing is that the reason to break it up is that we're going to learn about some issues, then students are going to compete. And then they're going to like be able to have that experience to learn from, and then they're going to get to compete again at the end. So it's a sort of like recursive process where they get some practice doing the thing that we want them to do, and then they're going to like get a chance to do that all over again. Okay. So this is the part of the class I want to like talk maybe the most about. you'll see that like on in week 8, the first day that like it says like paper 1 assignment. But really like this day is the day like after the exam where we're just basically going to tell them like here's how things are going to go from now on. Here's how this ethics bowl is going to work. Another thing that's really important that we do at this point is we divided the students into different groups. So initially, we sort of let them sit where they want and they like have chats and discussions with the people around them. But at this point, I think this is important that like the groups are relatively evenly matched because so let's back up a little bit. Like our goal here, let's say, is to get the students competing in an ethics bowl and sort of thinking through the issues, talking with one another, doing all the things that we love about the ethics bowl in general. And I don't want some groups to feel like we're just going to get crushed and have no hope. Um, and so we took the students and like we're intentional about like how we put them in groups. Dr. Hartman just randomly assigned the students groups, or not random, but like sort of just divided them as he wanted. I let my students sort of give a little bit input, like, is there a student you'd like to be with? Is there a student you definitely don't want to be with? So I got a little bit of a sense for like, hey, what groups are going to work best? How can I like make everybody kind of like at least relatively comfortable in the group that they're in? And I was kind of surprised at the number of students who were like, oh, there's this person, I definitely don't want to be with, with them. So I thought getting that information was helpful for me. Um, and so at that point, I'm going to scroll down to a different part of this document. There's these cases and questions. So it's like, okay, that we're going to talk about 4 issues in the first section. We're going to talk about poverty relief, the ethics of eating meat, abortion, and genetic engineering. We picked ethics bowl cases on these topics. So you'll see the first couple are from the IEB. A lot of the others you'll see are from the National High School Ethics Bowl. You can use obviously whatever cases you want. Obviously, both the Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl and the High School Ethics Bowl are asking they have the cases that are doing similar kinds of things. We just found that the High School Ethics Bowl cases were like a little bit more straightforward, a little bit easier to access for the students on some of these issues. So that's kind of what we went with. But I can think of others here that would work. Even the IEB cases. And as Rachel mentioned, like you can access now all of these cases. If you're teaching this a lot, which these sorts of things, or if you're sort of just getting into it, you'll find that like I just have like looked over these sets of cases like over and over, 10 times maybe, and just finding like looking through them. Is there a good case on this particular topic? And so after time, you'll become familiar with the ones that you kind of like there. So we at this point, that right at the beginning of week 8, we give them here are the cases that you're going to be working on. Here are the questions that you're going to be answering. I know one feature of the Ethics Bowl, the competitions, is that you don't know the questions in advance. I think that's too hard for the students, or it's going to present too big of a barrier. So the way that we thought to make this the easiest would just be to let them know what the question is going to be right from the get-go. So they already know, like, okay, this is the question that we're going to get asked. This is the question we're potentially going to have to present on. Though they don't know which questions their team are going to get. So basically the thought is for the first competition, they could get one of any 4 of these questions, and they'll have to be ready for it. I guess another thing I should mention maybe now as far as how this is structured is like, and this is like one question you might have, is like, well, how do you get the students like motivated to work on all of these issues? How do you make sure the groups are making progress there? And the thing that we've done is we have all the students are going to have to write a paper. So if you see kind of like here, at week 12, the beginning of week 12, their paper 1 is due. So each student is going to have to write about one of these topics. And we tell them like for each group, one student in one student in your group has to write about, well, how do we put it? Each group needs a student who's writing about each of the questions. So, like one of the students in the group is going to have to write about eating meat. One's going to have to write about poverty relief. One's going to have to write about abortion. One's going to have to write about genetic engineering. They might have five. Our classes were about 20 students. So we had groups of five. So there was a topic that each student doubled up on. If you had like fewer students, you could maybe do, 16 students, well, that would be perfect. If you have more students might have to double up on a topic. But the thought is like the ethics bowl is something that they're going to get some credit for. It's going to like help them learn. It can help them with their papers. Notice the paper is not due until after the competition happens. Um, but the paper is in some sense like the thing that they're being evaluated on, and the ethics bowl is going to float to help with that. Um, I'll say like another incentive that you can add in here is having the winners of the competitions get some sort of extra credit or some like additional points in the class. So I think Dr. Hartman said that like teams that won the competition got an extra point or two towards their paper. I told my classes like one of the unique features of this was that at the end of the semester, each of our classes like had like a winner, best team, and we picked the best teams, and then we had those teams end up competing during the final exam period. So like my best team versus Dr. Hartman's best team competed. And I told my students that if they like were selected as that team and they won the competition, then they would all get A's. So there's like ways in which we're trying to like motivate, okay, like the ethics bowl competition, in some sense, it maybe isn't worth much, but there's like a real reward at the end of the rainbow or whatever, like at the end of the day, if um if you make it that like if your team does really well. And for the honor students, they were pretty motivated anyway. I don't know, like I haven't tried something exactly like this with general education students, but I think they would be independently motivated. Like they want to do well. They don't want to be embarrassed on the one hand, and they want to like be impressive and do well, show off to their peers a little bit. So I think the motivation is there either way. Um, the last thing maybe I want to sort of spend a little bit of time talking about is like just kind of like how we moved through the class periods and then the competition themselves. So like the class periods, we would sort of introduce a case and then we would have two readings on it. So for example, this first one, Overendowed, it's about the case Overendowed is about charities or Harvard University, how they have these huge endowments. They have so much money, they really don't know what to do with it all. And they are working constantly to just grow that endowment. Um, and we're sort of getting the students to ask this question about would it be wrong to donate to your alma mater when there are people dying of starvation in developing countries? So it was really interesting to see how the students like sort of reacted initially. And then like as the ethics bowl gets closer, how they like sort of they have to like defend their views and they like can change their mind sort of at the last minute in ways that you don't necessarily expect. So I felt like pretty early on, a lot of the groups were like, oh, no, you can donate to whoever you want if you want to donate to your alma mater. But then as the competition got closer, it's like, are we sure about this? I don't know. Same with the eating meat. Like initially, it's like, yeah, of course, eating meat's fine as long as it's humanely raised. But then as the competition get closer, more and more groups were like, I don't know, I'm not so sure. So it's really interesting to see that sort of evolution in a way that you don't normally see it in a typical class. The thing I'll mention is that we sort of introduce the way we talk through like a topic is we might introduce the case at first, say, okay, here's this case. Now you all read Peter Singer. What does Singer say? And then spend some time talking about like, okay, well, how would what Singer says in this article, how do we take what he says and how would he think about this case? And I think it's important to give the students significant time to discuss amongst themselves what they think. So you want to create like a group ethos. You want them to be developing views as a group. And I think this is where you need to kind of like lean in a way on your stronger students. Like, how do we keep this conversation going? But like, who's going to take the lead here? And if you get the group sort of figuring out for themselves, like who's about, you get them presenting their views to the rest of the group, and then the rest of the group kind of gives the directions, sort of like working a little bit to like help them figure out what their presentation, which topics they want to talk about. We get to the end. There's this one day here that we have right before the competition where all the students are supposed to have kind of a draft of their paper. And the paper is sort of structured so that it's kind of like a presentation for the Ethics Bowl. What else do we do on that day? We practice.
It was
To
going so
discuss.
well up to now, but we're losing you a bit.
You're going to have to present, and you have a minute to discuss, and then you have 4 minutes to comment, or whatever. So we sort of walk through some of the logistics. Day before the competitions, we're giving the groups some time to amongst themselves.
Oh, did we lose Jonathan?
No, I saw him blink. There he is.
Okay.
Sorry. Hopefully I'll be more stable here.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it was for most of the time it was stable, just the last couple of minutes. Yeah.
Okay, good. So, um, yeah, I feel like if I talk about this, it's gonna get unstable again. It's just like every time. Okay, so right before the competitions, we kind of walk through how's the competition going to go, but also give the group significant time to discuss among themselves, like, okay, how are we going? What do we want to say? What is our position? Another thing we do kind of here is like we told the groups what their topic could be, or like what day they're going to present on, and then what the topics are going to be there. Because we want them to like be able to focus enough and have enough group discussion where it's like they're not just like, okay, like everybody's on their own, but not tell them exactly what they're going to do so that they can prepare for the exact thing. So like we might say, okay, on Wednesday, I just flipped, like I like randomized this, use Google or whatever to randomize it and say like, okay, it turns out that what we're going to do on Wednesday, competition 1A, is animals and abortion. And then I randomize the groups too. Okay, so which groups are going to present? Okay, it's groups 1 and 4 are going to present on Wednesday, and they're either going to present about the animals ethics or about abortion. And that is enough to like, okay, now they can like, they have these two cases. They know they really need to focus in on these. And another thing we sort of nudged and said was like, okay, you have these 4, you get some participation points. I think 4 points for participating in the discussion. And like, we want to see you like engaged in some way. You got to have like a speaking role. You got to say something. You got to contribute in some way. And so what we found was like these students actually did a pretty good job. Like we nudged them a little bit like, okay, here's how you could break up the presentation. Like there's a little bit of an introduction, maybe have somebody do that, have someone give the main argument. Maybe that's the person who wrote the paper. Have some other people in the group take objections to that view and respond to them. So in a way there, it's like, okay, now there's like group, here's the position that we're going to take. Here's my role in this thing. Um, and so it's like sort of all like coming together at this point. Yeah, John, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was just wondering, one thing I've struggled with sometimes when you run a competition in a day is like what's happening with the other students. And so one of the things that I've tried is to have two teams compete, and then a third team is the judges, and that's on a rotating basis. So I was just wondering what sorts of things you recommend for keeping the students engaged, or I've made it a homework assignment where like everyone's got to come in with a synopsis of the two cases that are being discussed. So at least I have some reason to believe that they've even read them, things like that. So I just didn't know if you had
Yeah,
suggestions about
yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah, I have like later on, I have an assignment where for each of these topics, the students have to do a reflection paper. The students have to do a reflection paper on three of the topics. So basically, like they've got to show me that they did one of the readings, they're reflecting about the issues related to one of these, three of these topics in some way. So I sort of think by this time, they've like engaged with these topics in some sense by doing this reflection piece. And then when the competition comes, I'm uh I think there's two ways that I've done this. One way is by just giving them like something they have to fill out. Like, hey, what was you think the strongest point that the first group made? What do you think like the weakest point was? What questions would you ask them? You know, some like sort of thing where they've got to like fill something out related to the discussion. Um, but I think I don't know how that's worked. Like, I feel like it keeps them engaged in some sense, and students generally do a pretty good job with that. Here, I didn't do that, and we didn't do that. My thought was, our thought, I think, here was like, well, the other students are writing about these topics. They might not be competing in this round, but they're writing about the ethic of eating meat or they're writing about abortion. No, not all of them. Some of them could sort of, not be engaged, but half of them are going to be engaged in one way or another because they're going to have to write about this topic and it's worth hearing what the people said. So I think that is sort of our way of keeping them engaged. And maybe having honor students too, I was like just a little less worried about that as a whole. Um, so I don't know. That's how we address that. But I think, as you mentioned, there could be other good ways to do that. Um, yeah. So I have served as the judge. Like another, like one of your ideas was like having them serve as judges. I think that's an interesting idea here because I was like holding out this like benefit at the end. I didn't want them to like they had like perverse incentives or like for self-interested reasons vote for one group as being weaker or stronger than the other. I thought like I'm going to reserve that for myself, and yeah, the students can sort of watch. And I found that the students, especially the students who did well, were like sometimes surprisingly like interested afterwards and like, okay, well, what could we have done better? And how could we have like done this? Because they like, okay, I want to do well. I want to like be the best team in our class at the end of the, I want to make sure that next competition goes like even stronger than this one does. So it was cool to sort of see a little bit of that from the students. Um, this sort of additional excitement around like, oh, okay, why did you rank us in this or score us in this sort of way? And then we sort of just repeated the same thing the second time, where in the second group of competitions, we had like the winners play the winners and the losers compete against the losers. So in some sense, it's like by the end, there's some team that should be 2-0, probably a team that's 0-2, and then some other teams that are 1-1. So that sort of like in a way just determines the best team in that class. Um, I think I maybe messed it up because I like gave teams I had teams tie in one of these competitions, and so there were like three teams that were, so it was like more complicated, but maybe I would nudge you and say like, it's easiest if you just pick a winner and go from there after the first one. Um, Lower down on here, you can see some of this for yourself. Like, okay, how did the timing work for the competition? Um, we sort of had a coin flip to determine which team would go first, and then a coin flip to determine which case was going to go first. So we didn't let them like pick whether they went first or second, or which case they had, or any of that stuff. So it's kind of just randomized, and then introduce the case. We gave them a minute in between each section. We had the presentation be 5 minutes, the commentary be 4, the response be 2, and then the judges' questions, which was my questions, were 5 or 6 minutes, and then just flipped. We also we did the points a little bit differently too, because I thought the commentary, I wanted them to like encourage the commentary to be robust, and for the group sort of responding to be focused on like, feel like, oh, even if they weren't presenting, they're still going to have a fair number of points be allotted for what they say about that case. So that's why we made that a little bit higher. I think that's about it. So I think that's the class. Like I said, at the end, the teams that were, because we had 2 sections, Dr. Hartman and I, we didn't feel like we had time to let to like have those teams compete again and then pick a winner from that. So we just sort of picked the teams that we thought were the best from our classes. And one thing that was really cool at the end was that we invited the dean of the arts and sciences and the director of the honors program and one of the other philosophy professors, and we had them be the judges. So that kind of got the ethics bowl a little bit more exposure and got people in other places at the university kind of interested in what we were doing as far as the ethics bowl is concerned. And I thought that was a really nice way to sort of like try and get attention for this activity on our campus and try and like motivate, maybe in the future and those sorts of things. And they did excellent with their questions too. It was really cool to see like non-philosophers asking them questions and see how they responded to those questions. So that was a really cool thing. Another idea, like maybe that I'll end with this, was like having ethics bowl students be the judges. So if you have ethics people who are on your team's ethics bowl, they can come in and serve as judges for that day or something. That is another way to do it. And I think in general, this whole like way of using the ethics bowl is something that you can potentially use to just find students who you can recruit. So I found a couple of students who I'm like, hey, you're really good at this. You should be on the ethics bowl team. And just having that like professor say, hey, you're really good at this and you should do this thing, that's pretty motivating for them, especially if they don't have other clubs or groups that they feel like they're maybe a part of. It can encourage that. So I'm going to stop there and just encourage other people to share like their experiences or how they did things differently or what questions they have. Thank you for your time. I'm trying to stop sharing. Yeah, Elizabeth. Maybe you're muted still.
Sorry. Did you have a sort of a template for them to do their presentations and their papers? Did you give them kind of I think you referred to the ethics
I
bowl
did.
format. Is that what they used?
Yeah, so if you scroll to, I guess it's page 8 of that document I shared. I don't know if you have the link still. I'll put it back in the chat. But yeah, page 8 of that document has like the paper assignment. And that's like what I give to my students. And then you can see on there, there's this link to like this document called paper worksheet. And that worksheet basically like just kind of ask them questions that if they can like answer all those questions in a row, then they've like basically written their paper. So I try to like do as much as work as I can to like, okay, here's like the format that you're trying to use, and you're basically trying to follow that. One thing I do, like my classes, this is just a general practice, and I'm fortunate enough that I don't have so many students that I'm able to do this, but I have my students meet with me for 15 minutes to discuss their paper. Um, so this is, I guess, something I didn't mention, but like I tell them that they have to basically have met with me before like the Friday before the rough drafts are due. So the rough drafts are due on Monday. The competition's going to be Wednesday and Friday. I tell them they have to meet with me by like the Friday before that draft is due, the class before. And basically, like, okay, what are you thinking about your argument? What do you think some of the objections will be? I just want to like make sure that they're like on the right path there. And I had about 40 students who I had to meet with. So you figure out if that's going to work for you or not. But that feels like meaningful to me. It feels like the students are like, it helps the students get a sense for what I'm looking for and how we do ethics. So I find that to be really helpful. But my colleague doesn't do that. So, you don't have to, that's not a necessary part of it. That's just something that I did.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I was just scrolling through where is I looked in I think I'm looking in the wrong place for the worksheet, the paper worksheet.
Yeah, if you look on so I guess this is page 9. At the
Oh,
bottom, it says next step,
oh,
start working
oh,
on the paper worksheet.
oh,
So
sorry. I had not gone far enough. Okay,
you're
thank you
good.
so
You're
much.
good.
I'm
Yep.
the
Yep.
bad reading student. Okay, thank you.
No, you're good. You're
That's
good.
super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, John. I think you're muted
Yeah,
still.
there we go. Okay. These are just two quick comments of ways maybe people can adjust it. If you have more students, is I do something somewhat similar to what Jonathan's doing in terms of the competitions in class. And one thing I do in a non-honors environment sometimes, because a poor commentary can really disrupt stuff, is that I will actually treat it as two separate teams, each presenting essentially against me. So they present, I give the commentary, they respond to the commentary, and then we do judges Q&A. So that can help a little bit. And then the other thing that I found useful is just if you have too many students to meet with them individually, I don't think there's anything wrong with this. Is like if you have, let's say, a 75-minute class, taking a day or even 2 days and saying each group of students, let's say you have 5 students, will come for 15 minutes. They get all of my attention for 15 minutes. Then the next group comes in or whatever. And you can do that outside of class and group office hours, but you can, I think, even do it during class time if you think and I think it actually they get a lot out of that. So just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, that's great. Alex, Alexander.
Hey, Jonathan, thank you for this really stimulating presentation, and thank you for sharing that syllabus. As someone that's taught ethics and who's judged and I've had some experience judging in ethics schools. This is sort of an abstract question that relates to the first part of your syllabus, the ethical theory part, and then you said you briefly talk about logic, and then later the application of ethical theories using logic to. This is kind of an abstract question that I sort of struggle with myself, but I'm just curious what you would say. It seems like none of the ethical theories that the standard ethical theories that you mentioned and that are in the textbook and so on enjoy any sense of default status in terms of just the general ethical community, right? But then when we go to teach logic or the art of reasoning, where what we're teaching is not just validity, but we're teaching the concept of a premise, the Greek idea of a lemma, basically a starting point that's like common ground and shared, that we can, sort of an episteme that we can work all come together around and then reason from, right? So like in the Crito comes to Socrates' prison and implores him to escape. That's the controversial thing. And then Socrates says, well, I'm the kind of person that follows the argument where it leads. And then they both kind of contractually agree upon a set of premises that they both can accept and then see, right? But if none of the ethical theories that we teach or that are in the textbooks, right, are something that can fill the role of a premise, is that a problem? Is that is there a contradiction there, or is that a paradox? I don't. So it's something that I've struggled with as an ethics teacher.
Yeah. I like to think that so I don't really like teaching Ross and like the prima facie duties, but my colleague does, so I like taught Ross. And like I think like Ross is like sort of right, but like unhelpful or something. Like it's I think the theories are valuable because they are considerations that ought to count in favor one way or the other. So they give us reasons. So the fact that like something produces pleasure and reduces pain, that's a pretty good, darn good reason to do it. But if it's like increasing pleasure, but it's violating autonomy, oh, well, that autonomy violation is a pretty good reason not to do it. And then we've got to like figure out, okay, well, how do we balance these against each other? And there is no like, it's true that there's no like assumed way, like there's no standard way of doing it. But I encourage my students, and I think like what's helpful and what I really like about applied ethics is like the use of examples and analogies and like helping us to think through like, well, what do we say about, eating dogs? Well, nobody's really eating dogs around here. And so what does that mean about the ethics of eating pigs? And I think if you're like, I think that analogy can like help us. It's like another thing we can add on to the theories to help get at consistency. And if we're not going to be consistent, we need to explain, or if we're going to do something that seems inconsistent, we need to explain, justify why there's a kind of seeming inconsistency there. And I think that's kind of what's going on in the ethics bowl. It's true that groups usually don't start out by saying like, well, we're Kantians and like, who cares about what these other theories say? No, they say like, here's the autonomy, like autonomy is really motivating us. And maybe there are these sort of like worries about it's not going to maximize utility, but then they're going to try and diffuse those kinds of objections. So yeah, it is a big picture question for sure. Are there other questions people have? I see some like questions that were over here. If nobody else raises their hand, I can try to say something about some of these. Yeah, John.
I was just wondering, I know yours is a practical ethics class, and so I guess this might be a question for everybody. So we teach a class called ethics. It's not specifically a moral theory course, nor is it specifically a moral issues course. And so one thing we have to navigate is the balance. And I'm just wondering what people think about this, that like the more time, so let's say that you're dealing with Kant and you could get into, how he winds up with the categorical imperative and talk about his understanding of freedom and dignity. And you can get into higher and lower pleasures of the mill, but none of that helps you in these practical application types of things. So I'm just wondering, sort of in principle, how you all think about the place of theory when dealing with students in a, let's say, intro level ethics class, or if you think like the use of the bowl is just actually a much better, more real experience for students that, getting into theory actually doesn't add anything to their experience, whereas being able to think through these cases is just a better direction, and we should maybe be doing less theory in intro level classes.
Yeah, Ron, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So the what I did when I've used Ethics Bowl in my ethics classes, I don't really use the Ethics Bowl competition model that you used. I just used the cases. We start out with three, I think 4, maybe 5 weeks. No, it couldn't have been that long. A few weeks, just a crash course in the very basics of ethical theories, just to give them some tools that they could use. But then I introduced them to the Ethics Bowl cases that were that season's set, and divided them up into their own mostly self-selected teams of which of the 4 theories that I really hit on, right? Kantians, utilitarians, virtue ethicists, care ethicists, and then each one of those teams for 3 weeks, each team wrote up little perspectives on how a virtue ethicist, for instance, would look at this case and see what was important about it from that perspective. And so they kind of got the basics, and then they applied the theory to the cases, and they wound up working through, each group wrote on each of the cases at some point, right, during that period. And then they'd meet with me, because I do that. The students got to meet with me. There's no way to do it. Most of my classes are 2 50-minute sessions per week, plus online stuff. So they have to meet with me. And then they each took and spent really the rest of the semester just writing papers, applying the theory of their choice to the case, to a case, and then also responding with, well, how would somebody else from a different theoretical background? And this kind of worked into that kind of balance that John's looking at, because by the end of it, the students each had a really good grounding in one theory that they found copacetic, and one backup theory that they understood well enough to get a passing grade on an ethics class, right? But that gave them the contrast, and that really worked. Now, what I did with those write-ups of the cases that the ethics class did, I sent those over to the Ethics Bowl team. And so they got a ton of theoretical perspectives on all of the cases. And the Ethics Bowl team said they loved it. The class itself wasn't so hot. I mean, they liked it. It worked well. It was successful. But it wasn't like the Ethics Bowl team was like, this is really great. The ethics students, they were like, yeah, this is okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's how I did a different class.
Yeah.
And tried to balance the thing John was talking about.
That makes me think of 2 separate things. So one thing that I think you're saying that's really right is you can use the ethics bowl in ways that doesn't involve a competition. So after below on here, I have some different syllabi where I'm incorporating the ethics bowl cases sort of throughout. Maybe it's okay, we're going to read a paper, and then we're going to have a discussion about an ethics bowl topic. Or we're going to do some theory. Now we're going to look at a few different cases that raise related questions. In my environmental ethics class, I really like this. Okay, we're going to talk about sentientism and anthropocentrism and consequentialism and deontology. Then we're going to talk about eating meat, animal research, and zoos. And giving the students a week where they're okay, diving into these practical issues. So I think that's definitely another model for how to use ethics bowl cases in a class. The other thing, there was something else about the theories that you were saying. Oh yeah, another reason the theories I think are really valuable is because not so much there has to be one theory to them all or they have to like pick one, but rather it just helps them understand how different people see things differently. So like they might think, oh, well, like obviously it's okay to eat animals because, theory X. But like, oh, if you have theory Y, well then yeah, maybe it's totally wrong to eat animals. And like just appreciating like, wow, different people see things in like this other way. I think that's like a pretty significant improvement to their moral reasoning, even if there's not like at the end of the day a solution to like which theory is right. I know that time is about up, I think, but John, do you want to have the last word here?
Oh, now I feel guilty, but well, I really like the way that you organize your class so that the cases sort of fit with topics. But I'm curious about this. I never really thought about doing it that way because what I've done is I've sort of I have a drawer. I'm thank God that we have this database now because I have a drawer full of cases, and I'll each year I'll select a bunch that are like, I think of these as really lending themselves to consequentialist analyses. So we'll do utilitarianism and we'll do some cases with that. And then I'll pick some cases that I think pivot sort of autonomy issues and respect for persons against a utilitarian approach. And then so it's a way of trying to get them to think about these theories rather than lining them up by issue. And I'm just wondering what people thought about like the pros and cons of those two approaches.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I was like writing that I was like preparing to give this talk, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like talk about like these different started to think like, well, maybe they want me to talk more about like doing the bull. And so I focused a bit more on this class where like we do the bull in class, even though it's not like an ethics bull class.
Mm.
But I think like you're describing, that's just another excellent way to use the ethics bowl cases. The cases are so valuable because they get students to move from the theoretical to the super practical and see how that transition goes. So yeah,
Great.
I
Thanks.
use the cases all the time for homework problems. Hey, apply. Um, Tell me what a consequentialist would say about this. And then, in class we sort of talk about like, okay, here's what consequentialists say. But then I just use the same cases and I ask them, okay, now in your groups, tell me what this different theory would say about it. And so it's getting them to see like these different cases would different people would say different things about them depending on what theory or theoretical perspective they have.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this talk. A lot of the resources you can get to via that link that I've shared, but if you want any other resources that I've mentioned or that you can't access through that document, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to answer those questions.
Thanks so much for being willing to do this while you're traveling too, Jonathan. It's so nice of you.
Yeah, no,
Wonderful.
it was fun. Thanks.